Welcome to SLP Nerdcast, your favorite professional resource for evidence-based practice in speech-language pathology. I'm Kate Grandbois.
And I'm Amy Wonka. We are both speech-language pathologists working in the field and co-founders of SLP Nerdcast.
Each episode of this podcast is a course offered for ASHA CEUs. Our podcast audio courses are here to help you level up your knowledge and earn those professional development hours that you need. This course, plus the corresponding short post-test, is equal to 1 certificate of attendance. To earn CEUs today and take the post-test after this session, follow the link provided in the show notes or head to slpnerdcast.com.
Before we get started, one quick disclaimer. Our courses are not meant to replace clinical advice. We do not endorse products, procedures, or other services mentioned by our guests unless otherwise specified.
We hope you enjoy the course.
Are you an SLP or related professional? The SLP Nerdcast Unlimited subscription gives members access to over 100 courses offered for ASHA CEUs and certificates of attendance. With SLP Nerdcast membership, you can earn unlimited CEUs all year at any time. SLP Nerdcast courses are unique, evidence-based, with a focus on information that is useful. When you join SLP Nerdcast as a member, you'll have access to the best online platform for continuing education in speech and language pathology. Join as a member today and save 10% using code NERDCASTER10. A link for membership is in the show notes.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to SLP Nerdcast. We are here today with 2 repeat guests. We are very excited to be discussing a topic that is near and dear to our hearts. Amy and I, as many of our listeners know, have worked as quote unquote AAC specialists for quite some time. And we're thrilled to welcome back Dr. Kathy Binger and Nancy Harrington. Welcome, Kathy and Nancy.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back.
Thanks very much.
Now, you guys are here today to discuss Down syndrome and generative language intervention with AAC. But before we get started on the really exciting stuff, can you please tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, I am a speech language pathologist specializing in AAC for many, many years. Let's just put it that way. We're over 40 years. I'm an employee of the University of Central Florida, where I'm a senior clinical instructor, and I'm also project manager for our NIH-funded research. I've experienced working with AAC users across the lifespan in New York, in Ireland, and in Florida.
And I'm Kathy Binger. I am a professor at the University of New Mexico, and I have been here for over 20 years now. And I also am an AAC researcher, and that's what I've spent my career researching. And I also was a practicing speech language pathologist prior to that.
We're so glad to have both of you here again. Every time you come onto the podcast, we have a lot of fun and we learn a lot. So this is going to be really great. Before we get into the good stuff, I do need to read our learning objectives. After listening to this episode, participants will be able to self-report knowledge gains related to reasons why AAC should be considered for young children with Down syndrome. Participants will also be able to self-report knowledge gains related to describing 3 main components of AAC Generative Language Instruction, as well as describing the grammar findings from the AAC-GLI Down syndrome study. For anyone who is interested in using this course for ASHA CEUs, the link to take the post-test is in the show notes. It's also available on our website. If anyone listening would like to learn more about the financial and non-financial disclosures of the speakers during today's episode or any course disclosures, that information is on our website as well. Okay, administrative stuff is over. We are excited to learn more about AAC. And yeah, I think I said AAC-GLI, but you said AAC-GLI. Which way should I say it?
AAC-GLI, because it's the happy, joyful intervention.
Absolutely. I love it. That's a great note to start on.
It makes us happy.
Yes, as we want all of our interventions to be, especially with young children. Keep it happy, filled with glee. Um, and I guess my first question to both of you is, why don't you tell us a little bit about this project? And specifically, you looked at the population of children who have Down syndrome. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about why you chose to focus on this population, and why you chose to focus on AAC and generative language intervention for that group of learners.
Yeah, I'll start off, but then I want Nancy to definitely talk about this too. I'm going to start generally. So, the big reason from my perspective that we wanted to go down this road is that so much of our research, especially the slightly larger studies that we've done, we've tended to focus, especially with the grammar intervention stuff that we've done, we've tended to focus on kids who have typical or moving toward typical receptive language skills. So kids who don't have intellectual disabilities. And every session we go to, and every time we do talks on those findings, people are saying, but what about all the other kids? And it's always been a valid question. And we've had kids with Down syndrome and kids with other types of, multiple disabilities and intellectual disabilities in some of our studies in the past, but we've never studied them as a population before to see how do these things behave with this type of a population. So, and we definitely have always believed that what we do is really relevant for those populations. With a few kids here and there we've done this with, we've seen solid findings from them, but we wanted to really do a study where we got to delve in a lot deeper with this population. So for me, I think one other thing that's worth saying about this is Down syndrome, we often they don't often get considered for, or they often do not, I should say, get considered for AAC. And to me, it's, even though the study that we're going to talk about today is about Down syndrome, to me, it's more generally about children who tend to have intellectual disabilities. So I think what we're going to talk about today doesn't just apply to Down syndrome, it applies to a range of children who have various types of intellectual disabilities.
Yeah, and what we see is that children with Down syndrome, very often their intellectual abilities, their receptive language abilities are far superior than what they're able to express with their natural speech. But very often then, as a result, they're underestimated by all those around them, including within the educational realm. So by introducing another modality, it's giving them the opportunity to have a medium for developing language to the level of what their comprehension is. It's giving an opportunity to participate more actively in varied communication contexts, both at home, in school, within their community. And it's also supporting the spoken language, time and time again. And we see it. We see, as we're promoting the language development of children using AAC, we see that hand in hand, and the research, bears this out. It supports the growth in the spoken language. How often, parents are saying, oh, they're saying this word now that they've learned using the device. They're using longer sentences. Oh, I saw you do this during your intervention session. So it's very much a supportive role for these young children with Down syndrome. And some of them might be longer term AAC users, and some of them are not. And it's bridging a gap and giving them access to the language that they need that's more comparable with their receptive and intellectual abilities.
And I'll throw in a couple of, I wrote down a couple of statistics before we started, so I'd have them at hand that directly speaks to what Nancy's talking about. We have some research, not our research, but there's research that shows that preschoolers with Down syndrome are difficult to understand an average of 67% of the time. Difficult to understand an average of 67% of the time for preschoolers. And to me, this next statistic is even more compelling. This remains over 50% across the lifespan. And adults with Down syndrome and older folks with Down syndrome are on average only 50% intelligible. So, the role of AAC may change over the course of a lifespan, right? Where kids may early on, when they have very little intelligible speech, use AAC as a primary communication mode. And then over time, they may use it more as a backup and use it for communication breakdown. So the role may change, but it can and should have a role for individuals with Down syndrome, many individuals with Down syndrome for potentially a lifespan. And I think one final point I wanted to make about this, in addition to, Nancy had mentioned that cognitive abilities often exceed speech abilities. So I'll actually talk about this and then one other thing. So cognitive abilities do often exceed speech abilities. And so their cognitive and their linguistic competence is masked by their poor speech, right? So if we can't understand them, people make assumptions about what their cognitive abilities are. And people make assumptions anyway about what somebody's cognitive abilities are if they have Down syndrome, because Down syndrome is such a recognizable kind of a syndrome. So there's already that tends to be there in people's minds, and then they talk and then they're very unintelligible. And then, so this is a compounding kind of thing. And so being able to, just like with lots of our other clients who use AAC, it demonstrates confidence when you can use AAC to show people, hey, I actually have the ability to do a lot of things and can say a lot of things. And then I just wanted to point out one other thing with this, that we now have research finally from Marianne Romsky and colleagues in 2023 that shows that AAC use doesn't just support the language itself, which is what Nancy and I are really going to talk about today. AAC also supports spoken language. Now, those of us, the four of us in the Brady Bunch scenario here, have all known this for a long time from personal experience, but we now finally have the good, solid research data coming out showing that when we use AAC, and Kaiser did a study a while back showing that, and Connie Kasari, that, with kids with autism, this is true, and we now have data with kids with Down syndrome as well, that AAC use supports spoken language as well. So there are all kinds of reasons to use aided AAC with this population.
As you were talking, I'm kind of, I was sitting here reflecting on my own AAC experience, asking myself questions like, I wonder why, I wonder why this particular population is overlooked or not considered. And I think the reality is, I don't think we're going to answer that question today, but there are so many barriers for AAC in general. Areas of the country or where there isn't a provider available, or a lack of understanding about how to do a funded evaluation. And I think what's really interesting about what you shared is you're describing kids who may be multimodal communicators, and the perhaps persistent thought of, well, they'll develop speech, or they have oral speech, so they don't need it, right? It's not necessary. It's a barrier, because then they have this thing that they have to kind of lug around. And I appreciate the shift in lens and perspective, that it isn't a barrier at all, right? It's something that we should be considering.
I love having you guys on, because as you were speaking, I was just like, yeah, all the things that they're saying. I mean, first of all, I am one of those people who would sit in your session and be like, but what about my clients with intellectual disability? So thank you on for me anyway, but probably also for many other listeners who are like eager for more and more of this research to come out that sort of reflects our populations who we're supporting. I'm in a school, but I think regardless of where you're working, if you're working with people who are using AAC, some of the people in your caseload probably also have intellectual disability. And I think that is always a challenge. And I think it is an extra challenge when your client has pretty solid unaided communication skills. So I almost feel like that is harder for other communication partners, for families, and perhaps even for the client themselves, when like my oral speech does work sometimes, and I have really good conventional gestures and unconventional gestures, and I like do a pretty good job getting my needs met. So I'm excited to hear you speak more about, because Nancy, you mentioned like our clients might not even use the aided AAC long term. It could be across the lifespan, like you were saying, Kathy. It could be a short-term support. But I'm really excited to hear more about your study specifically looking at building some of those expressive language skills
Yeah.
so that we can sort of get at that. Like sometimes there actually is a mismatch, and we think that our clients are, you know, have a pretty solid match between receptive and expressive, when in actuality they don't. But we don't know that because we didn't give them
Right.
an alternative modality. So I don't know. I know you talked already a little bit about why we should be thinking about AAC for young children with Down syndrome, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to kind of put on top of that.
Well, I think what I want to make sure, and we're going to get into this a lot more as we go along, but there's a reason why we're calling this intervention AAC Generative Language Intervention. It's AAC-GLI Generative Language Intervention. And it's because for this study and for this line of research that we do, we're really focusing on grammar, right? This highly neglected area of AAC intervention research. And so what you said that made me think about this, Amy, was you said, hey, like these kids with Down syndrome or people with Down syndrome, they are multimodal communicators. Hey, between this, that, and the other thing, they may be getting their needs met, right? They may be getting their main point across. However, many folks with Down syndrome have the capability to learn how to put clauses and phrases and sentences together. They can learn grammatical rules. They can learn, the syntax. And many people with Down syndrome are readers eventually, and they can develop language skills over the long haul. But what happens early on with them is that that's very neglected because they tend, on average, they tend to be quite delayed with their first words. They're quite delayed, even more so, like with putting two words together. This is an interesting fact about Down syndrome that I read a while ago that was anyway, I'll just throw it out there. So in typical development, kids have about 50 words when they start combining words, right? But with kids with Down syndrome, they tend to have 100 words before they start combining words. So there seems to be, I've always wondered this, and I don't know, even with our new data that we definitively have, I don't think we have a definitive answer to this, but I've always wondered how much of that, like that's always been measured with spoken language. So how much of that has to do with the fact that their speech and their phonology and motor speech, because they have both. They have speech sound disorder and motor speech. It's kind of a double whammy that's affecting, all kinds of things that are going into their speech development that's making their speech so unintelligible. They have a really hard time saying more than one syllable at a time. So how much of their speech, not just their underlying language skills, but how much are their speech skills interfering with their ability to put words together, right? So AAC bypasses that. And so, what we're seeing with some of our findings that we're going to get into here in a little bit, even with these, we're starting with some of them at age 3, is that they are combining words, and they're doing so remarkably quickly for people who tend to have intellectual disabilities. So this area, when we're talking about the intervention itself, it's really important as we talk to know that the work that we're talking about today is not just designed to build basic requesting skills or other early semantic skills. It does, and it can fill those roles, and we're looking at some of the data for that now. But the main thrust of it is actually to work with them on learning how to combine words and how to combine words that follow, in this case, the rules of English grammar, because it's just been so overlooked all these years.
And there's, you mentioned before, they're getting their needs across. So they may be using sign, or they may be using their single word approximations, but it's so much more limiting than when you're having, a broader range of vocabulary. We're able to combine words or symbols in order to communicate much more than needs. Think about all the functions of speech that any 3-year-old is going to communicate about. And we need to give our kids with Down syndrome that same opportunity.
Yeah, I love that distinction that you're both making so very, very much. And I think, you know, we've talked before, we've had you on. I know that we also in this whole Brady Bunch agree with the importance of paying attention to developmental norms and all the things like even like early present progressive verb tense that happens way earlier than we tend to think about or prioritize, particularly for AAC users. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking about, like, Kathy, you mentioned the literacy piece, you know, all of these generative language skills also come into play when we're trying to generate a personal narrative or retell a story or tell about something that's not happening in the here and now. You know, so there's a huge place for this. I'm very excited for you to speak more about the work that you did through this research.
I think that's a great segue to hear a little bit about the study.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how about I'm looking at the learning objectives here. I see that the second one is describing the main components of AAC-GLI, so maybe we should start with the intervention itself before we get into the nitty-gritty about who was in the study and what we found. Yeah, I saw a thumbs up.
I like that plan because
that's
I
a
always
great plan.
love, like, selfishly as the listener, I'm like, I want to know what I can do differently tomorrow at work.
Well,
So
you personally, I don't know how much we can teach you, Amy. You've been doing this for a long time too. So, but we have not always called this intervention AAC-GLI. We've been very slow to name what we do. So finally caught on somewhere along the line and started calling this AAC-GLI. But in our work, we've been doing very similar stuff for a long time, to be very honest about it. And the three main components that we always think hard about have remained the same. So one of those components is the intervention techniques. Another one is motivating context and activities. And then the third one is the technology. So we can break those down. I'm going to talk about the first two a little bit. Nancy, please jump in. I definitely want you to take on the technology piece, if that's all right. So the intervention techniques, we actually have in our Down syndrome article that's now published, and that you guys can, we can figure out how to get it to whoever wants it. We have an appendix in that article that lists a whole slew of intervention techniques that we use. So it's not just, of course, we use aided modeling, right? That goes all the way back to, 20 some years ago. And for me, with my dissertation, I studied that specifically, and people were doing that long before I came along. So that's a piece of it, but there are lots of other things that we do that are basically exactly like what you do for kids who don't use AAC, right? Wait time. Like lots of kids need wait time. Kids with Down syndrome really need wait time because they tend to have processing delays. So they need that wait time, not only to help them understand what you've just said to them, but also to then formulate their message. So that wait time is really critical. We have all kinds of other techniques that, the SLPs listening, they know the terms like recast, expansions, extensions, like all the things that we do when we respond to the communication attempts that the child has. And then lots of other things to elicit the language as well. So things like presenting a choice of two things. Do you want the red duck or the blue duck? And even when I said that, you heard me do something else. I didn't just say, do you want the red duck or the blue duck? I said, do you want the red duck or the blue duck? So vocal emphasis is a part of it too, of highlighting whatever feature. So they said duck. I want them to add something to it. I'm going to show them with my voice as well as with the items that I'm showing them. Like, so they get an auditory cue with the vocal emphasis. They get a visual cue by me showing them a red duck and a blue duck. To try to really highlight for them, hey, there's something else here that you need to add on, and it's meaningful, and it's going to get you something fun. So this motivating context piece. So there are a whole bunch of intervention techniques, which a lot of you are going to be familiar with most of them. And they're in not only are they in the appendix that we have, they also, within that appendix, there are hyperlinks with short video clips that Nancy put together of these intervention techniques, of us working with these kids. And I say us, meaning, mostly not me, but Nancy, her students, my students, with examples of all of the different intervention techniques. So there are a lot of them. One of the things that I say quite frequently about intervention research, about my intervention, me being an intervention researcher, is that I'm still figuring out what my intervention consists of, because there's so many things that we do as clinicians that we don't necessarily are even conscious of once we get good at it, right? You learn about it in school, and then you go off and you do it, and you keep doing it, and then it just becomes so ingrained. So we're trying to be as thoughtful as we can about making that stuff as apparent to others as we can, so that others can then go and do it if that's what they want to do. So we have a really nice table with lots of examples and video examples that everybody can access. And then, so that's the intervention technique piece. And the second piece is the motivating contexts and activities. These can be all kinds of things, right? In the past, we've done a lot of storybook reading studies. That's a great context for communication, and also serves as a beautiful bridge into narrative skills as well, spoken narratives, and eventually written narratives too. The main context that we used in this study for the intervention kids was play. These were all 3 to 5-year-old kids with Down syndrome, and we used play context with them. We use all kinds of different play routines. I think we had, I don't know, 9 or 11, Nancy would know, of them, from vehicles to, playing with little cars and trucks and the like. We had a dessert one with Melissa and Doug wooden toy sets and cutting the cookies and, baking the cookies and all that kind of stuff. So we had all these beautiful toy sets that we put together. It doesn't matter, you don't have to take your own special thing, just use whatever the parents have or use whatever's in the school. That's why we wanted to use the variety. It doesn't matter what the thing is. It matters that you do it and that it's motivating for the kid. And we let the kids pick to some extent what they got to play with, and we could change things up when we needed to for them. So yeah, and certainly we haven't done any studies with ADLs, but it can be activities of daily living as well. So getting dressed or bath time or whatever, as long as the kid has access to whatever form of AAC is appropriate, where you can work to build those skills. You could use, our intervention, AAC-GLI, really is, we always use the high-tech stuff, but man, we've worked with families in the past where the bathtub is a great time, and you have laminated pictures in the tub, and you can talk about the red duck and the blue duck in the bathtub too. So there can be different components to that. And when we're working with little kids, we really want to make sure these are age appropriate and highly motivating contexts. And then Nancy, I'll let you talk about the technology piece of the intervention.
So for this particular study, all the children used iPads. So we had iPads set up with activity-specific displays so that we could really focus on the language, and we were minimizing the navigation so that we were focusing on the children being able to produce the language without having to think about navigating to different pages. We started off with less symbols, so our initial displays had about 12 symbols, but the key thing about that is we made sure we had multiple word classes available. So, we had a pronoun and agents, we had a selection of verbs and adjectives and prepositions and some objects, so that even if there were only 12 symbols on that display, it was a 42 location display where we had a number of the symbols hidden. They were still set up so that they could produce those multi-symbol utterances, so they could produce that language. And then we had a protocol. So if they were using, a certain number of symbols across word classes, then, okay, we'd bump up and we'd increase the number of symbols that were available. And to be quite honest with you, with these kids with Down syndrome, it was usually only a couple of weeks and we were bumping up. It did not take very long at all before we bumped up to.
And we were seeing them twice a week. So we're talking, 3, 4, 5 sessions, and we're going from 4 symbols to whatever it was, 20 symbols, or, essentially doubling as we went along. So it didn't take it didn't take long. And Nancy,
No,
I do want you to
didn't.
keep talking, but really want to stress this word class point or parts of speech point. I think our initial displays, and there are images of them in our paper as well, so you can see them. I don't know that I've seen displays much at all out in clinical practice that look like this, where I've seen plenty of displays where lots of things are hidden, but not displays where you're very, very intentionally making sure that you have not just one or two, but 4 or 5 parts of speech always available from the very, very beginning, and a lot of these kids, they had never had access to AAC before. So there's just this bias that I really want to make sure we talk about, and maybe I'll let Nancy finish up with the technology first, but there's such a bias towards certain types of language that we focus on, especially nouns with in some cases. And we wait way too long, like way beyond typical development. And this goes back to a former podcast that Nancy and I did with you guys, where we talked about typical development and how kids are learning those grammar skills, and those grammar meaning syntax and morphology. They're starting to learn those syntactic skills when they're 18 months old in typical development, and that's when they start combining words. Kids only have 50 words in typical development when they start combining words. And so we've got to give our kids words that they actually can combine. And why would we wait for them to work on grammar skills and give them the opportunity to say red duck and blue duck and get to pick which duck they actually want, and learn how to, combine those symbols in rule-based ways, when that's not, why would we wait when that's not following typical development to wait? So, Nancy, I'm sure you had more to say about the technology.
No, that's okay. And we tied it very much into the context as well when you talk about what typically developing children are talking about and the fun things that they want to talk about and emphasize. For example, for one of the first adjectives was dirty. Oh my goodness, the children had so much fun saying, this dirty cookie or dirty cupcake or dirty tractor or dirty. It was motivating. It was just so motivating, and making sure that we had those adjectives available, as well as, the prepositions. So, we may have had under, so we'd play hide and go seek, and they'd have an opportunity to put things under, or, then the contrast, or is it in? And then we had these puppets that were set up with happy and sad faces. So they had so much fun with the emotions as well, and describing that, and hugging them, of course, was one of our verbs. So when we designed the technology and the layout and the vocabulary across the different semantic categories, we really tried to think about the context as well, to make it motivating and fun for the children.
If I can jump in for 1 sec, Nancy, I just want to make sure I point this out. So Nancy's describing all these kind of specialized materials that we made because it's a research study, but you guys don't have to do that. Like, it's not necessary to go out and spend money and, like whatever. Find what's motivating for the kids you're working with and do it. The point for us was about making sure that, because it was a controlled research study, we needed to have the same materials. We decided to have the same materials across kids. So we needed to build in some of these things, but that's not, I don't consider that to be an essential kind of component. I want to make sure that our interventions are flexible. And so we had all this range of vocabulary that is available. So the point wasn't, the happy, sad, dirty. And I'm not saying Nancy was saying that at all. I just want to make sure I pointed out. The point wasn't that we specifically had happy, sad, dirty, and hug. The point was we had, what I forgot to talk about, Nancy, was your favorite intervention technique, repetition with variety. We're trying to teach underlying grammatical structures. I don't care if they can say happy dog and sad dog. I care if they know adjective plus noun. If they know that adjective comes before the noun in many contexts, right? So we have this variety of vocabulary that within the technology and within our sessions as we're teaching them. So we're not training narrowly for our intervention. We're not training narrowly at all. Now we have in some of our past studies, but for this study, we had these kids in intervention for 4 months. They came in twice a week, and they got different targets every single time. Like we were teaching agent, action, object, or, subject, verb, object. At the same time, we were teaching adjective plus noun. At the same time, we were teaching prepositional phrases. At the same time, we were teaching possessives. Like those were our four main underlying targets. And then we were combining them. So it's not just dog drives a car, it's red dog drives a car. So we have the adjective in there too, right? So there are these things that we can combine and do so much with just, 12 up to 42 symbols on a page, 42, 48, I don't remember.
42.
42 symbols on a page. And so the bigger underlying point is to teach this repetition with variety, knowing that this was a really risky thing for us to do in a research study. It's easier to teach my narrower sorts of targets with very specific vocabulary, but we didn't want them memorizing. I hit this button and this button. We wanted them to learn the underlying grammatical rules. And so we took this risk in making sure that we gave them the vocabulary they needed for so that we could do this, and that all our posses of clinicians who were involved in the study all learned how to do this repetition with variety. So they didn't ever hear just red duck, blue duck. It was red duck and dirty cow and, big lion all in the same session. So different vocabulary, but the same adjective plus noun together.
So I have like disjointed talking points, but I'm gonna throw them out there anyway. This goes way back to earlier. I just want to say the appendix that you guys were talking about that has the video links in it, that has the examples in it. The other thing I really liked about it, as somebody who in my job, I work to support other communication partners, is you also talk about why you're using the strategies. And so that's helpful. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking like, maybe I'll check out that appendix, you should, because not only are there nice, like concise explanations of like what recasting is and how it might look, it also tells people why you're doing it. And I think that's very helpful for communication partners, especially like classroom paraprofessionals or something, to not just be like, do this thing, but to say, do this thing because this is why we're doing it.
And
I noticed,
right? Like do it because you need to add more information, and do it because, so that part.
And that's empowering not only to the, in our case, we had graduate student clinicians that we're training, but if you're training school personnel, and also for families, because if everybody understands why, then they're going to be able to independently make those decisions and transfer for them to the other contexts.
That's what I was going to bring up, just reflecting on everything that you've shared so far. And the idea that it's very hard to operationalize or clearly describe these things that we might do naturally when working with a child. And those things might come more naturally to some of us who maybe have been around kids or have nieces and nephews, versus maybe a family whose parents don't have a lot of that exposure and those things don't come naturally to them. So how helpful it is to see not only the list, but video to model how it's done and then why it's so important. I think that is like a ripple in a pond kind of just, sharing best practice and what can be helpful for people who might not have had that exposure. I think that's awesome.
I had another like thought/question, just looking at the article. There are pictures, like Nancy said, of the displays that they used. I noticed that as you went from like the 12 to the more complex, you didn't, like, for people listening, the display did not change.
No.
So the words that were there in the 12 are still there in the whatever.
And
the
they're
next
there in the
level
same
is.
place. They're there in
exactly the same place and across different, because you don't see all the different play routines there necessarily, but across all the different play routines. So any of the common vocabulary, whether we were baking or we were playing with the farm or we were playing with vehicles, it was all the same in all the same place.
Yeah. So the nouns, the specific nouns for baking versus farm are going to change, but the animals we played with, were the same, and they stayed in the same place. And some of the grammatical, especially things like some of the adjectives that we use, like we did use dirty across different play routines. So that always stayed in the same place across all of the displays as well.
The pronouns, the attribute, the size, big and little, and happy and sad, and all those.
Yeah, and Nancy, I'm going to say this because of the conversation you and I had yesterday about displays. We were looking at displays on other types of, well, let me tell you the side note first is we are continuing this research right now, and we're doing a longitudinal study with kids. We're following them for 2 years. And don't get, it's great, but it's for other purposes that we'll talk about on another day. But they're very small groups of kids. So ultimately we're shooting for 3 kids with Down syndrome that we're following for 2 years, 3 kids with CP, and 3 kids with childhood apraxia of speech. So there was a reason why I brought this up. Oh, it had to do with what Nancy and I were talking about yesterday. The displays that we're using with those kids are a little bit different. And they're not just our self-created displays that you could put on any device. We're using whatever the kids came in with if they had something. So the different kids are using different things. And but we're still using these same principles. And Nancy was schooling me yesterday on, no, like even though it's not just this single display where things never move, things may move and change somewhat, but see this word go, no matter where you are, the word go is in the same place, or whatever it was. So you can use a lot of these principles even if you're not using displays that look identical to the kind of displays that we're using.
I think that's such a good point. I appreciate you bringing that up. And I guess a question that I would have is also like, you could do it even if you don't have access to a high-tech tool,
Sure.
potentially,
Absolutely.
right? Like you could do this with a printout.
Yeah.
So
which we've done in the past. It's been
right.
We've done that in the past for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had an old boss once who said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough.
That's
and I
right.
think that that's a really nice way to sometimes we wish that we had access to all of these tools, but if you're excited and you're, I don't know, in EI and you have a young kiddo who you're working with, a family who you're working with, you don't have access to a high-tech tool right now, this minute, you could potentially print something out and give that a try too. As part of your step on the journey.
And I think one of the things I found when we've done this in the past, just as another relevant side note, talking about low tech stuff, is if you're going to do that and use a printout display or a series of printout displays, you have to be the voice. The voice output is you, so that if the child points to duck, you say duck. It can't just be silent. And when the child points to red, you say red. So you don't have that automatic voice output. So you need to be the voice output so that you know and they know what it is that they're pointing to and that you can help them build from there.
One of the important things that was part of the intervention as well is because we're recognizing that the comprehension of these children is greater than their expressive output, is we used grammatically accurate natural speech models. So yes, maybe they're only putting 2 to 3 symbols together. So it might be, I eat cookie, but then we might say, oh yes, I'm eating a cookie too, or you're eating a cookie, so that we're ensuring that we're using those grammatically accurate natural speech models. So we're feeding those receptive language abilities that the children that we work with have.
Yeah, and we know from the spoken language, not the AAC language literature, that there's been back and forth about this for a long time, but in general, the jury seems to have come back and said, hey, what we need to be doing for input for kids with all kinds of intellectual disabilities is grammatically complete utterances. Don't speak in telegraphic speech to these kids. They need it. I always call it the grammatical glue. They need the grammatical glue to understand what the heck you're trying to tell them. And they need the grammatical glue because they're learning language. So don't use telegraphic speech. It doesn't make things easier. It actually seems to make things harder. So even though we may be modeling non-grammatically, we get this question a lot. Why aren't you modeling grammatically complete utterances on the device? And it's because for us, and we may be wrong about this, the literature, we don't know the answer. So the literature we may be doing something different 5 or 10 years from now, but it's just so much to constantly be modeling, I am eating a cookie. right? And it's like, is the kid getting lost in all of that? And it's a lot of processing that they have to do, visual processing as well as motor processing, and what do they imitate and which words do they imitate? So we are highlighting the key words when we're starting out, but we're also always giving them the grammatically complete spoken utterance that goes with it. So we're not just saying or we're not just saying eat cookie, eat, and then modeling eat cookie. We're saying I'm eating a cookie. I eat cookie. That way, on the device, we're doing I eat cookie and saying the whole thing grammatically complete. So.
And the other thing we do is we make sure that those aided models, even though they aren't as complex as the natural speech, we're making sure that we're 1 to 2 symbols beyond where the child is in terms of their expressive output. We're really looking at their zone of proximal development.
I just want to say how much I appreciate that explicit description. Having worked in AAC for a long time, I think one of the questions that I see clinically so frequently is, how do I do this? Right? So we know that talking to kids with symbols is important, but what does it look like? How do you move your body? How do you move your mouth in conjunction with your finger? I think that description highlighted the importance of just the duality of what we're doing really, really well. So thank you for sharing that. Before we talk about the outcome of the study, are there any other highlights about AAC-GLI that you would like to go over?
Nancy, you have anything?
Well, I just think, and this is more anecdotally, but what we've heard from the parents as very much so, and how appreciative they were to be able to learn from us. They saw what was happening during each session. Sometimes some were in the room, some were watching through a video feed, but they really appreciated learning. They really appreciated the opportunities for their children to use more language than they were able to use with their natural speech alone. And they really appreciated that we respected the multiple modalities of communication as well. And I think that's important.
Thank you for sharing that. I would love to hear about the findings of your study. Well, maybe we should go over the methods first. If you want to talk to us about, you specifically how you went about measuring this. This was a randomized control trial study.
It was, and there are very, 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 very few I can count basically on one hand the number of randomized controlled trial studies that are intervention studies for kids who use and need AAC. So this was a really rare study. Unfortunately, this study got smacked right over the head with COVID, with the pandemic. So our numbers aren't what we ultimately wanted them to be, but even with all of that and the complications with all of that, we still ended up with, a relatively large study for our, given what we typically, compared with what we typically see. So we started out with 22 kids in the intervention group and 14 kids in the control group. Or it's more complicated than that because of COVID and what we did before and after, and I'm not going to get into all that, but that's basically, if you look at the graph in the published paper, that's what you see is we had 22 kids in intervention and 14 in control. There's a reason why there are way more kids in the intervention group. Not going to get into that. If you want the details, they're in the paper. But it's COVID related. So all the kids when they started had to be between 3 years old and 5 years, 11 months. So they were all somewhere between 3 and 5 when they started the study. Most of the kids we screened with Down syndrome who were between those age groups qualified for the study. We had a couple of kids who were too intelligible, and that the AAC just really wasn't going to be appropriate, but everybody else was certainly unintelligible enough. And most of them, there's even numbers, we have a little table in the paper that shows you exactly what their intelligibility scores were, and they were low. And they stayed low, as you might expect with this particular group of kids. We did the usual sorts of tests in the beginning. We looked at their receptive language skills. We looked at a whole bunch of things and we compared the groups to see, are these roughly equivalent groups? And we found that they were. There were no significant differences between the groups. So we had a nice a nice group of kids here who were comparable to each other in all of the key skills that you'd want to have them to be comparable on, like things like their receptive language levels and things like that. So so I'm not going to get into too much nitty gritty. I don't want to bore you guys to tears and make you turn off the podcast, but I'll give you some of the basics of how we set all of this up. So we assessed them for eligibility. And then after that, they were randomized. So, well, actually, we assessed them for eligibility, and then we gave them a 4-hour workshop, everybody, the control kids as well as the intervention kids. So before they were randomized into their control group versus intervention group, the parents received a 4-hour workshop that Nancy did if it was at the University of Central Florida where she is, or someone else did if they were here on the Albuquerque, New Mexico site. So everybody had this workshop, and it was a really lovely workshop that Nancy put together and has done many times, even prior to this study, has done similar things with families to get them up and going with an AAC communication app. And it was very much a workshop where it was a hands-on workshop. So part of the reason that we did that was that we really wanted to show that that's not enough. Like even that, a lot of families don't get that. And then we sent them home with the iPad. So they had a really solid workshop under their belts. And so we did see a bump with the kids, the control kids, because the parents, we think that part of that reason that we saw a bump in their skills was because of that the family had been given some information about what to do, but then they couldn't sustain it. The kids couldn't sustain it. And the families don't have the supports that they need if they don't get ongoing intervention. So anyway, everybody got this workshop, and then they were randomized to control group or intervention group. And then what happened was the control kids came in once a month, and we measured them once a month. So they'd come in, I'll talk about the measurement in a minute. And so they did their measurement sessions, and that was the only time we saw them was for their once a month measurement sessions. The intervention kids also had those once a month measurement sessions, but they also had intervention. So they came in twice a week. And then at the end of the month, they would have the measurement session. So as I talked about earlier, the intervention consisted of these play routines that we did. The measures were actually, the measurement sessions were different. We used this, oh wait, this is Down syndrome kids. Never mind. So they're still play sessions, but they don't get as many supports in the measurement sessions. So we're not doing co-construction with them where we're jumping in and filling in words, and we're not doing a lot of teaching, or really we're trying to do as little teaching as possible during the measurement sessions to see what the kids are basically doing on their own. So in a nutshell, like that's what's happening during those measurement sessions. And then we also did, when we could, again, because of COVID, we didn't have as much data as we wanted to, but we did we did maintenance measures as well. I think it was 1 month and 3 months after they finished the intervention. So anything else you guys want to know about the methods?
No, I think you've painted a really nice story of what you all went through. Sounds like COVID was kind of a bummer, to say the least. Sorry, Amy, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't know where it fits in the paper, but I did want you to talk a little bit about calculating how you did MLUs.
That I'm going to do next.
Okay,
Yeah.
sweet.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so that gets into our results and all, how we did our measures. So we have concocted over these last few years a new measure in AAC that we think and hope is going to be influential in the discipline. So we all know MLU in spoken language, mean length of utterance. Okay, anybody who's an SLP who's listening to this podcast, I'm sure you know what an MLU is. What we used to do, and I don't mean we, meaning me personally, but I mean as a field, sometimes in the very few studies you'd see where people were focused on grammar, they might just use MLU, but do it in symbols instead, right? Like just basically use that mean length of utterance and use it for the aided language. But we also know from the literature from ages ago, people have looked at this starting a long time ago. We know there are problems with using MLU in aided language. So one of the big problems is co-construction, where people jump in all the time to try to help. A kid says blue, and you say, you want blue. Well, what do you want? You want a blue what? And the kid says dog, and then you finally get blue dog. We didn't have to worry so much about the co-construction because we were the ones doing the intervention and we were the ones doing the measurement, and we didn't allow co-constructions during the measurement session. So that took care of that problem. So if that was the only problem, we still could have used MLU, but there are other problems too. One of them is word order. So we know that kids tend to have, with certain types of structures, we did a study on this a while ago showing that this is more of a problem with certain types of structures, but they tend to have issues with word order when they are learning to use AAC. So instead of saying, we had this in a study a while ago, like dog chase cat, they might say dog cat chase. Or they might put the chase first and put the verb first and then list who was doing the chasing. And so getting that straightened out takes a while with kids when they're using AAC, and they do things that they don't do in spoken language very often. So this is more of a unique aided AAC kind of issue. You can teach them correct word order, which is what we aim to do. Like, we're not so interested in a theoretical perspective of how frequently do kids do that if they're left to their own devices, blah, blah. Our interest as researchers and as clinicians is to teach kids to follow the rules of, in this case, English, or whatever the language is. So, so one of the things we want to account for in our MLU measure is those difficulties with word order. So what we do for that piece of things is that every utterance gets a word order score. So I'll stick with my cat chase dog. I like the cat chasing the dog, so we'll say that's our target. So in many people, that's actually a reality. So many animals. So anyway, we've got a cat chasing a dog. If the child says cat chase dog on their AAC device, the word order is fine. They get a score of 1. But if they say chase dog cat, there's no discernible word order there. That's not the syntax that we would expect to see. So it gets a 0. And then if it's in between, so like if they started with cat, they were supposed to start with cat and they did start with cat, but the chase and the dog are in the wrong order, then they get a 0.5. So it's just every utterance gets a 1, a 0.5, or a 0. And so it's called we call it it's just their word order score that they get. And then for their score, you would multiply that times the number of relevant symbols. So I'll come back to that in a second. So the one component that's different with weighted, we're calling it weighted MLU and symbols. With our weighted MLU and symbols, it's weighted based on the word order. So different weightings for different word order. And then the other piece of it that's really important is the relevance of the symbols. So as you guys know, especially when kids are starting out using AAC, they may be selecting all kinds of symbols that aren't really relevant to whatever it is you're talking about. They have this ability to basically push buttons like crazy if they want to, and they may have lots of things, or one word or lots of words, one symbol or lots of symbols in a given utterance that's not relevant. And so when we calculate using our weighted MLU and symbols, we only look at the relevant symbols. Determining that is something we don't have time to get into today, but that's, we have our operational definitions for that. So then to go back to our cat chase dog example, if the child says cat chase dog, and that's what we're going for, that's what we think there is, that's perfectly fine utterance, then all of those symbols are relevant, so that's fine. And then the word order is fine, and so that would get a 1. So it's 3 symbols, 3 relevant symbols times 1. That utterance gets a score of 3, just like you would with regular MLU. However, if they say cat, dog, chase, you still have 3 relevant symbols, but it only got a word order score of 0.5. So 3 times 0.5 is 1.5. They only get credit for 1.5 1.5 symbols in that utterance. So every utterance gets a weighted MLU sim score. And then once we have a corpus of utterances, like with a language sample, then you add them up and you divide by the number of utterances, just like what you would with a regular MLU. So that's how we measured their performance with the Down syndrome study, is using that weighted MLU sim score. Did that all make sense?
It did. I'm going to hold my 5,000 really like niggly questions that I have about it to like a different time when we're not on a podcast. But I think that was really helpful. And I think it was very, very helpful in the context of thinking about grammatical intervention for a population of students or clients or patients who are working through an aided AAC system, because I feel like it's a real challenge. And I like the idea of giving credit both for being on topic, but then also weighting it depending upon the grammar piece, which is part of what you're trying to get at with the morphemes in the MLU, but it's like tricky.
Well, and I'll tell you another quick side story here, because I know you'll be interested. And Nancy and I and Jennifer Kent Walsh can certainly come back time and again if you'd like us to. The big study that we're doing right now is all about measurement. And that's just one of 13 measures that we're looking at and seeing how they behave and how do they behave at different points in time. And because this measurement issue, we've never developed as a field psychometrically sound measures in AAC. And that doesn't even touch what happens with multimodal communication. Like that's another whole ball of wax that we need to certainly, like, I beg researchers who are interested in this kind of stuff to please, get into that or contact me, because we have all kinds of data that we could use to start to look at that, but we need more AAC researchers to do that kind of work. So anyway, it's just one of many measures that we are actually looking at right now.
Well,
But
we're definitely we're going to take you up on that supremely nerdy conversation to be held at a future date. I'm very much looking forward to it. I was hoping you could tell us. I'm gonna put my MLU questions in my thought bubble and hang on to them. But what did you find? So
guess what? Nothing. No, I'm just kidding. Just flip that.
Oh my gosh, you really had me there for a minute. I was like, wait a minute, I read this paper. It wasn't nothing.
No.
You
Please
said that with such
stop the
enthusiasm.
podcast after I said. I hope nobody shut it down after I said that. No, we had some really nice findings. It would have been nice if we had more kids, but we saw that our intervention kids were producing, they were always producing literally more, their weighted MLU's score on average was more than the kids in the control group. So after 3 months so all the kids, roughly, actually I should pull my graph back up, but I'll tell you where they were after 3 months. So the control group, their weighted MLU in symbols was at 1.09. Which means, if you understand what MLU means, they're doing single symbol utterances and that's it, right? They're still, after 3 months and after 4 months, that control group was 1.01. So they even dropped a little. They're just doing single symbol, single relevant symbol utterances. The control group after 3 months was at 1.32. Now you got to remember.
Intervention group.
Did I say control? Intervention. Thank you, Nancy. The intervention group was at 1.32 after 3 months and 1.37 after 4 months of intervention. So that may not sound number-wise, like if you're just looking at that as a number, like it's a big difference, but it is a big difference when we're talking A, about MLU, B, that we're talking only 4 months of intervention, and 3, these are kids with Down syndrome, and we don't expect them to be making huge gains with how quickly they're putting utterances together. Now, our kids with typical receptive language that we'll come back and talk with you about another day, where we did a similar study, they had much bigger gains. But the fact that we found something here in this short period of time with these kids, that weighted MLU of 1.32 and 1.37, that's showing these kids are pretty consistently putting 2, and certainly we know from the data, some 3-word utterances together after coming in to see us for, not very long period of time. So we saw generally consistent gains in that weighted MLU sim for the intervention kids, but we did not see that for the control kids. And these certainly are substantial gains for only 4 months, 3 and 4 months of intervention.
Well, that's
I'm
not
so
nothing.
Yay!
I'm so excited
I
for
feel
the
like
longer
that's
study. Sorry.
very exciting. That's wonderful.
I'm pumped for your longer study. I think it's going to be awesome.
It's going to be interesting to see. Yeah, Nancy's taken charge of all these kids and seeing how far we can get them in a 2-year period. And those kids were really focused with the new kids who were following for 2 years. We're really focusing on the measurement development stuff. So we don't have any control kids. We're not doing that part. We feel like we already showed that we know that this intervention works, but let's see how far we can get them and what their developmental trajectory looks like over a longer period of time.
I want to just highlight one really important point that I think we shouldn't take for granted as working clinicians when we hear about research like this. There is so much information out there that we can't apply in our regular jobs. The intervention is too time consuming. It wasn't well defined. It requires materials we don't have access to, whatever. But this sounds very doable. It sounds very applicable. You've created this beautiful chart that describes, exactly what, it needs to go into it. And I also feel like so often when we're talking about kids who have, who are multimodal communicators, or they have complex communication needs, we might feel, I've heard this from a lot of clinicians that I've worked with over the years of, 4 to 6 weeks of therapy goes by and we're not really seeing the needle move, or, what do I do? What do I try? So I guess I'm reflecting back to you that is it's wonderful to see movement in such a short period of time with an intervention that is feasibly implemented within a regular context. I think
And
that's
these were,
really powerful and not to be taken for granted.
Well, and what I didn't mention that I should have mentioned is the length of the sessions. So Nancy, how long were the sessions?
The sessions were 30 minutes.
And that includes doing a symbol review.
Yeah, that included symbol
beginning of the
review. So it was
session.
5 minutes symbol
So
review
that's
and 25 minutes.
total,
Yeah.
typical, pretty typical sort
Yeah.
of session length. Now it's not perfect. I'm not to end on a downer, but it's not perfect. These were one-on-one sessions. And that doesn't always happen for sure. We need tons of research on how do we do this sort of thing in group intervention. And this was not, even though a lot of our past research and our future research will be on communication partner instruction, they're showing these gains without us teaching the parents explicitly how to do this at home, and to do this sort of thing off and on during the day, or teachers or anything else. This is just these results are really just from them coming in and showing up and working with us a couple times a week.
Which is amazing, because that's very well aligned with the infrastructure that we have available to us as clinicians when we are on a service delivery grid of 2 times 30, or
Right.
whatever the reality
We did
is.
that intentionally. I mean, also it's not practical to have families. We've had, we tried to do it in the past with 3 times a week, and family, it's too much for
Yeah.
family. But yeah, I mean, why would we develop interventions that aren't practical? What's the point of that, people?
Great question.
Agreed.
A great question.
The control group emulates where, say, you have a parent who decides to get an iPad and download an app and maybe do a training online or go to a training, and off they go. And we kind of mirrored that with our control group to show that it makes a difference. It really does make a difference to have that skilled intervention.
That's another really good point too. This is a tiny question, but you mentioned the symbol review that takes place at the beginning of every session. Can you just tell us what that is, what that looks like?
So we did that because these were very activity-specific displays that were being used during our sessions. So we wanted to make sure they remembered where the symbols were. And we changed, depending upon what play routine they chose from the week before, they may have changed. So we wanted to remind them where the symbols were so that they were set up then to create those multi-symbol utterances and use them appropriately.
And what did that look like, Nancy? So it's been a little while now.
So there were two options. Either the child could select the symbol, said, oh, let's find all our animal friends. Where's hippo and dog and duck? And oh, where's I and you? Because we had pronouns on there as well. And so we might do that. Or sometimes the children just they weren't feeling it. They didn't want to do that. So then the clinician might say, oh, yeah, well, I'm going to help you. Look, here's I for me and you for you. And here are our friends, hippo and horse and duck. And these are all the things they do. They eat and they drink and they hug. And, and so if the child didn't feel like selecting it, then the examiner just selected it to make sure that they were all reviewed. All the symbols were reviewed before we began the actual 25-minute session after symbol review.
That reminds me of something else I really want to mention if we have time about this. That's just a really fun detail that we came up with, and it worked beautifully. So for I and you, why would you represent I and you using anything other than the words I and you? Like, let's use the letter I and let's use YOU and keep it in the same place. That's a bias that I have. Like, why teach them one abstract symbol when they need to learn this one? But what we did in intervention to teach them and work with them with I and you is we had all these little Doug and Melissa wooden figurines, and we put our faces on them and we put the kids' faces on them. And then I could go in the car, and I am in the car. And now you are under the car, and no, I didn't run you over. But we really thought about how, there's always this pronoun problem of how do you teach pronouns? And man, we had great big ones and we had little ones. So little ones could fit
they
in
loved
the car, and the big ones could do the cooking or whatever else. And they worked. So it's just a little trick for AAC or spoken language or whatever. If you're working with kids who you need to work on with pronouns, man, that worked really well.
No, it worked really well. And we've actually extended it for the next project with family members, so that they can talk about mommy and daddy and siblings and everything during the session. So then they have more follow through for home.
And it's, it's cheap and easy to do, really. Like, you could use cutout dolls if you want to from cardboard. I mean, they don't have to be fancy. It's just fun to stick yourself in a car and off you go.
It's so fun. What a great idea. I love that. I really appreciate everything that you guys have reviewed. This sounds like I said, I don't want to take for granted the power of a study like this and the impact that it can have on us as clinicians. In our last couple of minutes, I wonder if you have any clinical takeaways that you want to share for any SLP listening who is excited about this as an intervention that they can try in their classrooms. Anyone who's new to AAC and wants to give this a spin, what do you have to say to people who are curious to learn more about this?
Well, I think dive right in and remember typical language development, because we always have that in mind when we're looking at the way we were setting up the grids, the functional and fun play routines, ensure there's access to the range of parts of speech for generating utterances with a diverse vocabulary and parts of speech, and have fun. It's AAC-GLI.
I love that so much. That's so great. I don't know if there's anything we have to end it with that statement.
I think we have to end it with that statement. Yep.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for being here. As always, we learn so much from both of you. For anyone who is listening, we will link all of the references and resources in the show notes, including the reference for this article. A quick thank you to our production team who makes this possible, Dr. Anna Palamumi, who makes our ASHA CEUs possible, Tegan Ahern, our production manager, Darren Lopez, our production assistant, and Tracy Callahan and Dr. Mary Beth Schmidt, who assist with our peer review process. And last but not least, thank you so much, Kathy and Nancy, for being here. We hope you will come back. It's abundantly clear that you have a lot more to teach us. So hopefully we'll see you back here again soon.
We're so blessed and honored to have you guys out here doing this great work, and we will always come back. So we really appreciate the work that you're doing, and this dissemination service is invaluable. So thanks
Absolutely.
you too.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you for sharing your time and all your knowledge. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much for joining us in today's episode. As always, you can use this episode for ASHA CEUs. You can also potentially use this episode for other credits depending on the regulations of your governing body. To determine if this episode will count for professional development in your area of study, please check in with your governing bodies, or you can go to our website, www.slpnerdcast.com. All of the references and information listed throughout the course of the episode will be listed in the show notes. And as always, if you have any questions, please email us at info@slpnerdcast.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to welcome you back here again soon.